Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm just going to record a set of short videos as well. I've decided that when I have some reflections and some thoughts and some musings and some questions floating around in my head, it's definitely worth sharing those thoughts with you because I get such amazing engagement and feedback from you about the content I'm sharing. So what I want to talk about today is this question that has recently been posed to me in response to one of my videos, and that has to do with this claim that people sometimes make, both Muslim men and women, that Islam is patriarchal. And I've been thinking about this question actually, is Islam patriarchal? Because I don't believe Islam is patriarchal, but I hear this a lot. So just the other day, I received a comment on my video, which I will read out verbatim. It said, Islam is patriarchal. Why are you denying it? So I was being challenged to explain why I thought Islam is not patriarchal. And in fact, by denying that, I was perhaps going against the teachings of Islam. And we often hear this encapsulated in other forms of other wording as well, such as, women are subordinate to men and Allah's created one superior to the other, or Allah's preferred one gender over the other, etc. So there are various versions of this question that reach us. And that's what I want to very briefly talk about today. Is Islam patriarchal? And I want to point out here the difference between making a truth claim and what is an interpretation as well. So, is the Quran patriarchal, or is it that we have read patriarchy into the Quran? Now, Professor Asma Barlas, I cite her often. She's one of the greatest scholars of our time. You should definitely read her work. In her book, Believing Women in Islam, the subtitle of the book is Unreading the Patriarchal Interpretation of the Quran. So she is pointing to the fact that the Quran is not patriarchal, but patriarchy is read into it. And we have to train ourselves to unread patriarchy in the Quran. When you hear claims like this, there are two things that I think you should always keep in mind. The first thing is that the Quran was, in its historical setting originally, when it was revealed, it was addressing a highly patriarchal society. In that society, women were inherited as property. We know that infant girls were often buried alive because parents did not want to raise girls. They were considered to be a liability. The Quran was addressing a highly patriarchal society. But what it was also doing was that it was setting a trajectory for that society to change its ways. And it was doing that both through its theological and moral teachings, but also through its legal reforms. So it was setting society on a trajectory to minimize patriarchy over the course of time. But unfortunately, as we look into history, we know that patriarchy reasserted itself. But we know that the trajectory that the Quran was setting was away from patriarchy. The second point, and this is my response to this question, that Islam is patriarchal, why are you denying it? My response to this question is as follows. If we say that God is a just God, we then have to also prove that patriarchy is a system that God wants. And if it is a system that God wants, then it must be a just system. In other words, anyone who claims that patriarchy is Islamic, or Islam actually aspires to a patriarchy, they have to first prove that a just God has some divine hikmah in imposing or implementing patriarchy on a Muslim society. You would have to make the case, a convincing case, that patriarchy is a just system. Now, I'm not aware of any scholars who have been able to make a claim like that. And we know historically, socially, economically, patriarchy has always been experienced as an oppressive system. It is a hegemonic system of power, and it is a system that oppresses women. This is what historical, economic, social research tells us. So I have yet to come across a scholar who can explain to me if there is some kind of divine hikmah behind patriarchy, what is it? Or even to make the case that patriarchy is in fact a just system. The reason why I'm pointing this out is we know that the Quran is a justice-oriented book. It is justice and compassion, one of the key core values in the Quran teachings. And if you then try to fit an unjust system into the Quran, throws it out. So for anyone to claim that Islam is patriarchal, they must first prove patriarchy is in fact ordained by God. and then they must prove that it is a just system, because we know that God, that Allah cannot be unjust. We know that Allah cannot be unfair. We know that Allah will not impose an oppressive system on us. If anything, the one thing that we can say about Islam with confidence, that it is a religion of emancipation. It emancipated people from the suffering that and the indignities that they were facing every day, the vulnerabilities that they were facing every day. The vulnerable are at the heart of the Quranic discourse: the widow, the orphan, the traveler, those who are enslaved because they owe debts or loans to other people. The Quran is emancipatory. The Quran is emancipatory towards slaves. So if we're going to insist that Islam is patriarchal, then the people who are making that claim, and it's, by the way, a very tall and audacious claim, and it is not a substantiated claim, there is no evidence sitting behind it. But if they are going to make that claim, they must first prove that patriarchy is a just system from a just God. Until they have made that case, they should not make the claim that the Quran, in fact, wants to institute patriarchy. This is just my thought about this question. I thought I'll share that with you. I hope that you find this beneficial. In future, if you ever come across a claim like that, please make sure that you're challenging that claim and you're critiquing that claim, and you're shifting the onus back onto the claimant to say, please prove to me that patriarchy is a justice-oriented system. Once you have done that, then we will move on to exploring the idea that Islam, in fact, wants to institute a patriarchy. Thank you very much for listening. Inshallah, I'll be back soon with some more discussions on hijab. Assalamu alaikum.